Healthy soils are essential for achieving broader goals, such as net zero carbon emission, reversing biodiversity loss, and sustaining human health. But to fix our soils, we must first understand them. We need tools to identify quickly the land that is being degraded and needs our attention. Then policymakers can target those areas with policies to promote sustainable land management and farming practices. For this series, we are interviewing some of the leading scientists who are working to create these tools. They are part of the project funded by the European Union called AI for Soil Health. And as the name suggests, they are using artificial intelligence and a range of other cutting-edge innovation to lead the way towards understanding our soils. In this episode, we hear from Josiah Judson, Senior Farming Advisor for Soil Health at the Soil Association. Hi Josiah, thank you for joining us today. I would like to understand what's the role of the pilot sites for the AI for Soil Health project and why are they important in the context of developing smart soil monitoring strategies for Europe?
Thanks so much for having me. We have a network of 13 pilot sites across 11 different pedoclimatic regions in Europe, which effectively represent the different geographies that the project is covering. It's important that we cover the whole continent and we're representing all areas that the project is concerned with. And the pilot sites within those areas basically have three purposes. So firstly, and a very important part of the project, they're for stakeholder interaction. They're also test beds where we can check whether the products we're making make sense. And thirdly, they provide an opportunity for education, dissemination of what we're doing, teaching about soil health awareness and the novel ways we're thinking about looking at soil to wider audiences. In terms of those different roles, for stakeholders, we want to make sure that the products we're making don't just make sense to us as scientists or even from a sort of NGO perspective or a policymaker perspective. As important as those things are, we want to make sure that they're useful to farmers, land managers, people who are actually implementing changes at farm scale and smaller scale and have to address business needs at the same time. Advisors would be included in that as well as researchers and the other groups I mentioned. And pilot sites are these representative sites where stakeholders can gather, test out new tools, offer feedback to what we're developing, which is part of an iterative design process, see strategies, practices implemented for real on the ground. It's all part of what we call co-creation. We are co-creating these products. We're not just making them from our side. We test to make sure that the predictions that the project is making about soil health actually correspond to real measurable data. And then obviously we think about the external communications, the education opportunities, and pilot sites are really important for showcasing this. If we're really serious about the ambition of European-wide soil monitoring, then what we're doing has to make sense to everyone who is going to be using the products or will be impacted by them. So we have to develop them in a very holistic sense, and that's what the pilot sites are for.
Thank you. And what is ground truthing and how does it have an impact on the products like soil health data cube and in-field sensors?
Well, I think to answer that question, it's important to just recap quickly how AI for soil health basically works. What we're basically doing in this project, in order to map soil on such wide scale, we're basically at the heart of the project is, you can almost think of it as asking the question, how can I use something which is easy for me to measure to tell me about something else which is much harder to measure? To do this, we're basically taking data which is widely available, which is easy to find, small spatial scale, for example, topographic data, climate data, surface temperature anomalies, reflectance values, all the things that you can potentially measure from, say, a satellite or something that is widely available today. And then we're also taking quite sparsely available target data, things we want to know, for example, bulk density, salinity, pH, other things like that. What we do is we put those two layers, if you like, together, and we use the relationship between the known values for the points that we want to measure, the target values, the things that are harder to find, the relationship between those and the things that are easier to measure at the points we have available. And then the sort of AI machine learning process creates a relationship between the two of them. It creates a model. And then we use that model, having trained it on those points, to predict values where we don't have data. So what we learn from that is that the values we have across the continent are just that. They're essentially predictions. And we make them available through the data cube. We make them available as maps, and you can go and look at them today. You can go and pick different layers, different soil health indicators, and look at them at very fine spatial scale. But we have to remember that they're predictions. And because they're a map, we look at it and we're inclined to believe it. We're inclined to believe that it looks accurate, reliable, because that's what we're used to in maps. And the pilot sites come in at this point and they ground truth those values. So these ambitious predictions we're making with state-of-the-art tools, we have to check they're real. We have to check we understand the uncertainty that's associated with the predictions. Otherwise, they're not telling us anything useful. They may look useful, but they may actually be misleading us into thinking we understand something that we actually don't. And it's really significant that we know how right or how wrong we are, particularly if through the monitoring law, this is going to impact, for example, financial incentives or environmental regulation that's spatially explicit. And so what we do is we go to our pilot sites and we sample, we measure, we use traditional measuring techniques for all of these properties, all these indicators, take them across our representative spread of pilot sites, and then we get a data set that contains values for all of those points across the continent. And then what we can do is we can take those things that we know that we've measured, we can compare them with predicted values from the model we made at the start, and then using that we can work out a degree of uncertainty that we're getting between the predicted values and the actual values. And that's basically what we're doing. It's in ground truthing the predictions.
Farmers are busy people. What is the single most useful thing that will come out of AI for soil health for a UK farmer who is trying to balance productivity with environmental health?
Well, there are many things coming out of this project, so it's hard to put a finger on any one thing. The map is very useful. We need to make sure we understand the uncertainty, particularly at that smaller farm scale, for that to be really useful for farmers. But I'd say at this stage, probably the most useful thing is the novel indicator methods and toolkit that we've been developing. In order to balance productivity and think about soil as an environmental resource, we want to understand it very holistically. We want to cover biological as well as physicochemical indicators. That's critical for thinking about all the functions of soil together. At the moment, testing for those things traditionally is very expensive, it's very time consuming, it's not particularly well standardized. So you don't get an answer usually before you need one as a farmer. You need one quite quickly. And it's quite hard to compare the answer you get with, say, a value you might expect elsewhere. Now, the toolkit is very useful because it's going to recommend potentially quicker, more in-field, more accessible, cheaper ways of measuring these things. And we're looking at a number of products, for example, around soil nutrient availability, around aggregate stability, and around microbial communities to see whether these very quick methods can represent what we know from traditional methods. Now, if that works, what that would enable farmers to do is to have much quicker, much more holistic understanding of particularly these biological properties which mediate a lot of the physicochemical functions of soil that we understand more naturally. And then if those do become available to farmers, the app serves to supplement that by providing a sort of spatial context for those indicator values, thinking a better idea of local benchmarks. It provides an area where data can be securely stored, hopefully, and with that, potentially the introduction of AI decision support tools to provide advice based on values that farmers might be able to access through these new methods. So just to sum up, new methods contextualized within a broader framework of understanding that hopefully aid decision making, offering better understanding, better vision into the soil to make better decisions and think about long-term environmental and economic resilience.
Doc's Farm, the focus of the English pilot side, is currently transitioning to organic practices. How do the AI for soil health indicator help you see the transition happening in the soil before it's even visible in the crops?
Well, in a traditional sense, we are doing what you would do if you were going through a management transition like this. We are baselining soil health when conversion began, using indicators that you might traditionally use to do that. For example, understanding the bulk density of the soil, understanding carbon content, understanding concentrations of different available nutrients, understanding pH. And we will compare those with what we call the baseline indicators that we're measuring through the project now. But the project offers more than that. We're going to have available to us a range of potentially novel indicator methods, some of which we've deployed and are analysing now to enable us to see things we wouldn't usually be able to see, such as, for example, the organic conversion effect on soil biological parameters, which we'd be very interested in. But more than this, because of the spatially and temporally explicit nature of AI for soil health and the data cube and the data that it's providing, we can actually estimate differences in parameters such as the ones I've mentioned using remote sensing, thinking about where they were 5 or 6 years ago when we did convert. And now that sort of snapshot through time will only get better as new data get incorporated into the model, for example, new sampling rounds of Lucas data. But obviously, we're very excited by that. We constantly want to be checking it against real sampling and continuing that ground truthing process with our pilot site that I mentioned at the beginning. So it does enable us to see a lot more. And Soil Association, obviously, we're very interested in the soil effects of organic conversion. So it enables us to understand that process better.
And how is soil health monitoring changing at the moment?
Well, we're looking at several welcome shifts at the moment that are coming in terms of monitoring, although they all naturally come with benefits and risk. The first that I've alluded to already is the move towards understanding soil biology and indicators related to biology, whether that's looking at sort of eDNA or fungal bacterial ratios, respiration, microbial biomass, different functional groups. These are all very in their infancy in terms of methodological standardization, how we use them at scale. Soil biology is involved in mediating all of those functions that we know in soil, and so sits really at the center. Understanding it really enables us to understand soil very holistically. It's upstream, if you like, of the things we've traditionally measured. The risk with a lot of these methods is that data are much harder to interpret. It requires quite a lot more understanding to know where certain results sit within a broader set of benchmarks. And then values can change. Indicators are very sensitive to short-term changes, for example, in weather conditions, local conditions. That will complicate how they get used. It's always a trade-off between I want to see something quickly with the indicator that I'm choosing. If I make a management change, I want to be able to see that in the soil very quickly. You have to balance that with the stability of, say, indicators which take longer to see a change, but which I suppose give you less information about the success of what you've tried to do. And in that camp, you'd have the more traditional things, for example, changes in organic matter, which traditionally take a lot longer to see change. So that's really the change that we're seeing at the moment, moving towards faster response times. Obviously, in the project, we're thinking about more accessible indicators, and there's a serious move towards that. If we're really serious about national or even international scale soil monitoring, we have to have accessible tools to those who are going to use them. And there has to be knowledge available for those tools to be deployed properly, and funding available. For example, farmers who are already under a lot of financial pressure need to be supported to do this and add to the environmental goods that they're already longing to provide through their work. And then all of that comes in this big bracket of remote sensing, seeing soil through, for example, these satellite data sets that we're looking at, thinking about how they can broaden our picture and enable us to see.
And finally, speaking about international perspectives, how can the UK learn from what's happening in Europe right now in regards to soil health strategies?
I think what the EU is modelling really well through, for example, the adoption of the soil monitoring law, through its wide, broad approach to funding soil research generally, is a really clear ambition to unify soil monitoring, how it happens, to unify a sort of coherent soil health strategy, and placing that at the heart of the sort of policy discussion. If you can measure something, then it's very easy to legislate around it. It's very easy to create clear frameworks for how we should protect the resource we're talking about. Now, in the UK, we're in a process of aligning dynamically with certain EU regulations, and there's lots of discussion about the extent of that at the moment. But what we're seeing in Europe is quite inspiring as we work out our own sort of approach, unified approach to thinking about soil as a resource and how we want to value it, how we want to protect it, and how we want to see it as part of the sort of economic and societal resilience in the UK. Now, I would say we have quite a lot of work to do in that space in the UK. There are signs on the horizon of an ambition to unify how we monitor and how we think about soil, and also as well how we can empower and fund farmers to steward soil as a resource. But we really need to, I think, look at these ambitions and think about our own national conversation about priorities for land, and think about the extent to which projects like this can really benefit how we in the UK think about soil, as it has across the EU.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your work and for your time. Thank you.
Not at all. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
AI for Soil Health is funded by the European Union and has received funds from UK Research and Innovation under the UK government's Horizon Europe funding guarantee. For more information, visit aiforsoilhealth.eu. That is AI for as number soilhealth.eu.